As entrepreneurs, we all have a reason why we choose to leave our 9 to 5 for an 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. I'm here to capture those stories of why we all hustle and grind for our companies. Kelly Cardenas is known as the Vibe Authority. In addition to being named as one of the top keynote speakers in the world by Success Magazine, Kelly has been featured multiple times in Forbes, is a national best-selling author, and the host of the top-ranked podcast, The Vibe. Kelly believes in building people and allowing the people to build the business, and this becomes possible when you tap into the missing ingredient that changes everything, the vibe. Hey, folks, thanks for coming to the podcast today. Appreciate it as always. Today, we have a super special guest. Kelly is absolutely one of my favorite humans, great friend, and I am super stoked and incredibly, just really happy to have you on, man. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate you.
I'm excited to be here, man. You're
Cool.
you're a light in this world, bro.
Oh, thank you, man. I really, really appreciate you. So why don't we start off with this? What's your ninja skill? Because you've got a really cool ninja skill.
I think it's shifting the vibe in any environment that I walk
Oh,
into.
yeah.
But once I realized actually what it was, this was the hard thing, Andrew, because I
Yeah.
used to think it was the energy that I brought into the room. Like
Mhm.
if I rah, 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 everyone's going to be rah, rah, rah. But that turned a lot of people off. And I was like, oh, it must be their problem. But then
Uh-huh.
I realized in my whole life, the paradigm shifted for me, the whole thing, when I
Uh-huh.
realized it was the way that people felt when I left the room, as opposed to the energy that I brought into it.
Mhm.
And that actually became my vibe. And that's how you create the vibe. And when
Mhm.
I locked into that, it was like, oh, cool. How can I make people feel amazing when I
Mhm.
walk into the room, as opposed to how can I be amazing myself walking in?
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think, there's this huge buzzword right now, corporate culture. And it's something that we keep hearing a lot about. I think it's this really nebulous term. I don't care for it because there's nothing quantifiable to it. What specifically kind of does Vibe do as far as like corporate culture? How do you like correlate those two?
Well, I think that it's powered, like your culture is powered by your vibe, right? So
Mhm.
it's cool because in my book, which is right up here, you can see it above my right hand.
The
Um,
Vibe.
the first chapter is all about culture.
Mhm.
And when I looked at it, because it was such a buzzword, I wanted to define it. And
Mhm.
what it is it's an environment that's suitable for sustainable growth.
Mhm.
And think about that. Like that's what a culture is. Plus, what it talked about was that a culture is actually living. Like when there's cultures in yogurt, they're actually alive.
Mhm.
And once a culture dies, it's not a culture anymore. And
Mhm.
when I say that, it means because sometimes what people do is they take the rules and the regulations and they say, this is our culture, but it's dead. It's not alive. It's not alive with the people. And when the people in the culture realize that all their rules and regulations are nothing more than a list of their screw ups, it gives freedom to all the people in the organization to then innovate and then adapt immediately.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I think it's such a huge buzzword right now, but again, not quantifiable. I don't think there's anything that like you said, it's just here's our rules and regulations. We happen to, we put a fun spin on them when we have beer on Friday, and that's really culture. And I think there's a miss,
Well,
and
and what I think too is making sure that you understand. First of all, you understand why you're in business in the first place.
Mhm.
Second, build your leadership, right?
Yeah.
And they have to be really potent in that and the reason why you're doing it. And then the leadership will build the culture. The culture is the way in which people tell the story about what it is that they're doing in
Mhm.
comparison to their own life,
Mhm.
not the story that I tell about Andrew's culture in his business, and that I just talk about Andrew. You've got to make it personal. It's the difference between renting and owning. And when you get to an ownership point of the culture, when people actually own the culture in a business,
Yeah.
that's when the business really starts to take off and grow.
So go into that a little bit because I think it's a really, really important point that you just made, the difference between, renting and ownership
Yeah.
within a company. And I think it's something that people haven't heard before. Can you go into more detail on that? Because I kind of like that concept.
Well,
Yeah.
if you rent an apartment, you knock a hole in the wall, you wait for the repairman to come and fix it. And a lot of times you live with the hole for a couple weeks or maybe even months if they can't get to it. If
Hmm.
you own the home, you fix that. Even if you don't know how to, you fix it that day because
Yeah.
you own it, because you love it. And I tell you, like environments that I've rented, and think about this, if you only believe in the culture of your business until you get home and then you shut it off, you just rent it for 9 hours.
Yeah.
And the difference is when you own it, it doesn't overtake you, but it becomes a part of who it is that you are. Right.
Mhm.
And so the companies that I find that have a successful and sustainable culture are ones that a person can actually make a part of their story, right? Because it doesn't matter. Like when we go back to vibe, it doesn't matter the culture or the style of culture or that you have ping pong tables, anything like that. It
Yeah.
matters how the people in the organization actually feel about it. And when you own it, like when it's a part of you and you could tell a story that you have a personal ownership of, it changes the game. And then people start to talk about it. Like, think about this. When I worked with Paul Mitchell years ago,
Yeah.
I used to tell the story of Paul Mitchell, which is John Paul and Paul. They had $700 in a dream. They put a product in the back of their car and they drove up and down the coast and they sold product out and started a multi-billion-dollar business out of the trunk of a car. Now,
Mhm.
that was me renting that story.
Yeah.
Then as I started to grow and I would tell that story, it got me indoors and I started to be able to educate all over the country. As I
Huh.
began to educate all over the country, telling the $700 in a dream story, what started to happen is I started to see financial gain and I started to see my family change in my life.
Mhm.
Now I started to rent to own. So I would tell the $700 in a dream and I would tell my story. This is how I connected it. And then it got to a point where I didn't need to tell the $700 in a dream anymore because I had built salons all over the country. And now I had kids who were living inside that dream. But it was my responsibility as a leader to then transfer that story where those kids that were living that life could then tell the story so they owned it. And I ask everyone that's listening, do you own it right now or do you rent it? Has it become a part of your story? Once it becomes a part of your story, it's curtains. Now I could stand next to John Paul on stage and not say, "Oh, John Paul, you're my idol." It's John Paul. Thank you so much for your $700 in a dream because it created a situation for me that was $360 in a dream that it cost me to go to school. And then I could sit next to a girl named Jen who bought the company from us. And for her side saying, her, 500 or 700 or $1,000 in a dream that it took her to fly from Detroit to Las
Mhm.
Vegas to get the job with me. And now she owns the company.
Oh, no, that is that is so well put. And I'm really happy that I asked you about that because I think a lot of times we hear these things, we hear these concepts, and there's some of us that have seen that progression of, you rent it, then you rent to own it, then you own it. I've just never heard it put so well. So one thing I love about you is being able to take that really high level information and break it down into something just so simple that anyone can understand it. I love it, man. Oh, that's awesome. So, you're talking about working with for Paul Mitchell and that, and I think it's really important people understand kind of the backstory that you have because you kind of had this interesting, you have this really interesting backstory, and I always love hearing it. I tell people about it because, like, oh, dude, this guy's done some really cool stuff. Um, Tell us a little bit more about working with Jean Paul and the Paul Mitchell folks.
Well, what my pops said to me very early on in my life always was that you always follow number one, like
Mhm.
that you always, we don't care. My parents said, we will never compare you to anybody. And we don't
Mhm.
want you to compare yourself to anybody. We just want you to do the best that you possibly can. And also, like, whatever it is that you're doing, you better go 100% in it and we will support you 100%. Now, this started with Andrew with the trumpet. I wanted to play the trumpet and my parents didn't have the $500 that it cost to be able to buy that trumpet, but you know what? They found it and
Mhm.
they figured it out and they went and bought this $500 trumpet that I probably played for 2 weeks, Andrew. And,
Oh
but they
man.
supported me. I went all in. And then I realized that my parents' commitment was higher than mine because
Mhm.
I quit after 2, 3 weeks. My parents had gone all in. But
Mhm.
when they had taught me that, see, I was cutting hair in high school because we didn't have enough money to be able to cut our own hair or go and get haircuts. So
Yeah.
I was cutting all my friends' hair because my dad bought dog clippers. Well, when I got out of high school, my mom, by the time I was cutting everybody's hair, because I played football, basketball, and baseball, and I would just fade everyone up in the locker room.
Mhm.
Well, by that time, my mom said, "Well, why don't you go to school for that?" This was right after my senior year of high school, and I thought, what else I got to do? I'm going to go to community college, whatever. Let me go check it out. So I go check it out. They say it's 8 hours a day, 5 days a week for 10 months. And I'm like, you are smoking crack. There is no way on God's green earth. I'm doing another year of high school.
Uh-huh.
But on the way home, what God asked me is after after 10 months of community college, what are you going to have? And I was like, well, I won't even have a degree. And then he asked, what are you going to have after 10 months of hair school? And I said, well, I'll have a license. He said, that's where I want you to focus. So then my parents kicked in my mind and in my heart. If you do something, you have to do it to the best of your ability.
Mm-hmm.
So I sought out the number one, and I found this guy who happened to be one of the top stage artists for Paul Mitchell. And I just followed him. I went into hair school and I just followed this guy around, and I followed him all around the country, everywhere I could go. And I'd be in the front row and I'd hand him my card after every show. And I say, my name is Kelly Cardenas and I'd love to work with you someday. My name is Kelly Cardenas. I'd love to work with you someday. My name is Kelly Cardenas. I'd love to work with you. And Andrew, you know how long it took until he responded?
I'm going to say a year,
2.5.
2.5 years. Oh,
Two and a
man.
half years being at every show I could be at, and I'd be in the front row and saying it until he finally gave me a job. And what I found is there's you're familiar with Dr. Edwards Deming, right?
Yeah.
So Dr. Edwards Deming, he has a concept that says follow number one, because number two can't do anything. But there's far too many people in life following number two, and then they get mad with their results. If you follow number one, and so that's my parents, right? They were like, do it to the best of your ability. So what I did is I found the number one, the guy. So that was Robert, and he worked with Paul Mitchell, and so I just wanted to be with him. And then I ended up meeting John Paul one time, and I said, hi, my name is Kelly Cardenas, because I was taught that. 2 years later, I'm in a room, Andrew, with like 70, 80 people. There's models in there, all the stuff. And I'm just like assisting, little kid. John Paul walks into the room, and when he walks, it's almost like the sea parts. It's got this energy that's crazy, right? He walks in, everyone's like stops, because he's the owner of the company. He's the guy, guy with the ponytail. You guys all know, beard and the ponytail. Walks into the room, everyone parts. I'm in the middle. I'm just like one of the, and he walks halfway through, stops, looks me dead in my eyes, and he's like, hey, Kelly, it's great to see you. I haven't seen you in a while. And I was like, wow, that's been like 2 years, man. How does he even know? Years later, I asked him the question, how'd you remember, man? I didn't say man. I said, I said, JP, and I was shivering. How would you remember? He said, it's very simple, Kelly. It's because I stay grateful. And I said, what? He said, I used to sell product out of the trunk of my car when I only had $700, and it was me and Paul sleeping in the car, driving up and down the coast, selling that product. I know where I was. I know where I'm at, where I am now. So I can stay present exactly right here, right now. And that's how I remember your name, because I'm grateful that you would even say hi to me.
I think that's powerful. And I think that's something that we often forget about, is, at least as entrepreneurs, and something that I've had to kind of check myself on regularly, where it's, we live in this world where we always have to look like we're confident. We always have to have this level of just confidence in ourselves. I read a meme a while ago that said, if you're an entrepreneur, you have a crazy level of faith in what your ability to do is. And I think that, stepping back for a second and just understanding that gratitude is an integral part of that entire process is super important. Yeah, absolutely, man. That is an awesome story. I don't think I've ever heard that story before, and I really love it.
Well, I think what was nice about it too with John Paul is when he talked about gratitude, it was not a theory. It wasn't him renting it. He owned it. And he owned it through his own personal testimony as he told me the story, because I had seen the whole thing. Because if you look from the outside, I mean, this is a guy who owned Patron and sold it for $5.4 billion. That's $1.3 billion more than Star Wars sold for. Let's put that in perspective.
Yeah.
Right? Let's sit in that for a second. On top of that, he still owns the number one hair care company in the entire world that's still privately owned. The number one. So here's this guy that then turns to me and remembers my name.
Yeah.
Right. So for me, that lesson came from true wisdom and experience, as opposed to logic and theory.
No. See it in action. I love it. Yeah. Oh, I'm just kind of basking in the glow of that story, because it's fun. And, it's nice to hear it's nice to have that standard set early and that standard set. So that's awesome, man. I love it. So now I know you talk a lot about your pops.
Yeah.
And I love to hear pop stories. So, because a lot of times what has happened in our past predicts our future, or helps us, I shouldn't say predicts our future, helps us to be able to, it gives us a specific skill set to be able to go into the future. And so your pops was one. He had an interesting thing he used to do for, you had an interesting bedtime routine with him, didn't you?
Good God. We were just talking about this in men's group, man. Like, and you hope that as your parents are telling you all these things that you don't become your parents, right? Like, oh, when I get older, I'm going to let my kids eat ice cream every day because I wanted to eat ice cream. And then you get to a point where you're like, I'm my dad. And I was in my men's group and I told them about subconscious learning. We didn't know subconscious learning. We didn't know all this stuff. My dad called it sleep teaching. So my dad took a auto reverse Walkman, broke the headphones, drilled a hole through my wall and my brother's wall, stuck the one headphone in my pillow, one headphone in my brother's pillow, and played millionaire and self-help tapes 8 to 10 hours a night from the time I was in 4th grade to the time I was in 6th grade. I'm laughing because if I didn't laugh, I would go crazy, right? But think about that. Like, okay, think about this. Every time I give you a bit of information, any one of your listeners right now, any information that I give them or stories that I give them, instantly inside their head is saying, but I had this experience, and they're warring against it. Okay. When you're asleep, your defenses are completely down. And as you take in information while you're asleep, you can't resist it because it just goes. I don't believe my dad knew this. I believe my dad was just wanting to be mean to us and wanting to, like be crazy. Cause that's what my pops was. Like my pop was crazy. Like he didn't believe in being lukewarm. He was hot or cold. He was either gonna he was either not going to do crack or he was going to smoke it the whole world in one pipe. You know what I'm saying? That's the type of pops he was. And I love it. But in this realm, right, I did the math on this. This is crazy. And I think I've told you, you've heard this before, but if you take 8 to 10 hours of sleep, let's round it to 10 just for easy math, 10 hours a day, 7 days a week, that's 70 hours, 70 hours times 50 weeks in a year is 3,500. 3,500 times 2 years is 7,000 hours. Think of this. That was before I was in 6th grade. So I had 7,000 hours. Think of this. If you listened to this podcast, be about an hour, you did that once a day, which would be a lot, 1 hour a day. That would be 7 hours. 7 hours times 50 weeks in a year with 2 weeks off would be 350. It would take you 20 years of listening to 1 hour a day consistently to listen to as much as I had to listen to by the time I was in 6th grade.
Interesting. And is there, you probably don't remember any of it, but
resentment?
Do you think there's some sort of
resentment? Yes.
I want my 70 hours a week back.
I mean, but there is, man, like the notes that like I could show you. I don't know if I've ever shared this with you, Andrew. And I'll share it with you. Are you coming to the Vibe Room the 23rd?
Maybe we'll have to see how things work out, but yeah.
Well, hopefully you'll be there.
I'd love to.
I will bring my notebook from when I was in 4th grade, when I was 11 years old, that I had to take notes from. And these notes are ridiculous. Like, don't use other people. Don't use your own money. Have a good relationship with a banker. Leverage yourself. All these things, all the things that I built my life on, are all the things that I had to listen to while I was mad in 4th grade because I just wanted to play with He-Man and like do WWF. You know what I'm saying? Like that's what I wanted to do. But most of the times it's the things that we don't want to do that we do when we don't want to do them to get to the point where we get to do what we want to do when we want to do it.
Yeah. And it sounds like it did have a huge effect on you because you remember it now. And that, I mean, what you
Yeah.
got at 11 years old is actually pretty solid. I know some people that are significantly older than that who don't have that ability, don't know the other people's money, good debt, stuff like that. And so you kind of got a primer on it a little bit. Yeah, started early.
It wasn't just about the financial side. Like it was about principle based. It was about treating people well. It was about kindness. It was about all these things that it's so funny because it's like, for me, a lot of times I tune out on social when a person starts to say like, I'm manifesting abundance and and doing all this stuff. And I'm like, you're renting that. You're renting it because you read it a couple of times and now but you don't really believe it because you haven't been through the fire. Once you've gone through the fire, and those principles for me, like having a positive attitude, I didn't have any choice. I listened to 7,000 hours of having to be positive. Like, you know what I mean? Like I didn't have a choice, man.
Exactly.
Like, and it made us weird because no one could stay the night at our house because if they slept on my pillow, then they'd be like, what is this microphone, man? Can you imagine? Can you imagine, Andrew? Like, think of that for a second, right?
Contact knowledge, it's like a contact buzz. It's,
Oh, yeah. It was contact high. That's definitely 100% what it was.
So, I want to actually just kind of rewind for a hot second. You did this to me on my podcast, so I want to kind of rewind for a second and talk about law of attraction, because that's a huge thing right now. I'm a believer in it, but I believe we really miss a big chunk of it. So, positivity, being in a good mindset. I don't think I've ever seen you not in a good mindset. So I think you're a really good person. I don't think I've ever seen you anything other than exactly what we're seeing today. So what I'd like to, so as far as the law of attraction, where do you think, how would you modify it? We'll put it that way. We won't put a kind of a negative spin on it. How would you modify that to be what you have to fit within your experience, based on kind of, you said, going through that trial, going through the fire?
Well, I think that if you think that anything is magic beans, just stop. Like, just stop.
Yeah.
There's no silver bullet. There's no magic beans. And what I find is that people find like, and becomes their platform. Like, my platform is the law of attraction. And yeah, I mean, do you attract, if you start being positive, do you attract? But here's the thing that's crazy, because we just talked about this. Is this okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
We just talked about this discussion. The law of attraction is not that you attract what you are. Yeah. That's not the truth. It's not scientifically correct. What's scientifically correct is if you take a magnet that's positive, it attracts a negative.
Yeah.
So in the theory of it, yes, the law of attraction, if I'm more positive, I'll be around positive people. No, if you choose to be around positive people, you'll be around positive people. Right? And the more positive that your mindset becomes, the more that you can start to see negativity from a mile away and choose if you don't want to be there anymore.
Yeah.
Right. And so I'm a huge fan of Catch Me If You Can.
Oh, I love it.
And one of the biggest lessons that they taught is that if you're in the counterfeit business, you never have to study counterfeits. All you do is study the real thing. Because that study helps you to understand what the real thing looks like. And what the real thing looks like, you will spot a fake from a mile away. Meaning that if you, like, let's talk about like, oh man, and honestly, like I literally want to jump off a cliff when I hear those words, like the manifesting abundance and all the garbage that you'll hear.
Yeah.
Because it's not magic beans. What you know and I know, Andrew, is if you're not willing to do the work, it won't work.
Yeah.
No matter what it is. You are the best in the business. Like, if a person wants to craft their story, create a keynote, and create a course, there's no other choice on earth but Andrew Chestnut. No other choice on earth. Okay. Although, if you go through training with Andrew, who's the greatest in the world at that, and you actually don't do what he told you to do, guess what? You won't attract anything.
Yeah. Yep.
You know what I mean? And then what'll happen is the law of attraction will cause doo-doo to come into your life. Why? Because you weren't willing to do doo-doo. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah. And that's why I wanted to touch on it is I think it's this huge buzzword right now. People like it. It sounds really fuzzy and warm, but there's also another side to it. I mean, as entrepreneurs, we know the suck. And that's, I think, an integral part of who we are. And it builds us to be stronger and it builds us to be able to take on higher levels of or more difficult tasks, which then take us even farther forward. So I think it's
Yeah.
hearing the other side of it is really different. It's not just about sitting on top of a mountain going a lot and kind of thinking about it. It's there's a different, it's totally different. Yeah.
Well, we've
Totally
talked about
different
this
vibe.
before, where it's like,
Yeah.
they say the power of positive thinking will do everything. No, it won't. Like I could
Mhm.
positively think about getting on a treadmill all the time, and my butt will still be the same size if I don't get on the treadmill. You know what
Yep.
I'm saying? Like
Yep.
the
Got to
part
do the work.
the part that I see that so much, and me and my brother talk about this, is like people are constantly working so hard to figure out how to not work. Like it's work. Like
Mhm.
it's going to take time. It's going to take energy, and it's going to take a ton of grace. And you
Yeah.
know what? If you do these, have you heard this concept that I've talked about called inch stones?
Yeah.
Is
Yeah.
just the inch stone. It's the
Yeah.
little tiny inch stone. It's not the milestone. It's the
Mhm.
inch stone. What can you do, that little tiny thing, and give yourself grace? Because what sucks about today's society is it's like, you know what? I built a 7-figure business and you can too in the next 6 weeks. Now,
Mhm.
Andrew, I've built multiple 7-figure businesses, real,
Uh-huh.
like real time, real. Like when I say 7-figure businesses, I've done multiple $1 million businesses all over the country. They were run by 18 to 24-year-olds. So I've done it. So I'm not talking from theory. I didn't read it in a book. I don't rent it. I own it. You can't take that story away because I actually have it.
Mhm.
In doing that, 7 figures, it took a while to be able to create it.
Yeah.
Now, is there a breakdown now that I can look at it? Yes. It's about
Mhm.
like, let's just do quick math. $4,000 a day on a 5-day work week is $20,000. $20,000 a week times 50 weeks in a year is $1 million. To be
Mhm.
able to do $4,000 in a day on an 8-day or 8-hour workday, it is only $500 an hour that you need to produce in your business to be able to create $1 million business. That's a seven-figure business. Is it possible? Yes. Can you do it? Yes. Will you do it tomorrow? Most likely not. It's going to
Mhm.
take time. And so, as opposed to, and this is where I get this is what, but when I speak on this, my wife is going to be so happy that I say this because these are her words that she's been trying to tell me for years.
I love it.
so, so thank you, Brooklyn. I love you and I listen. I promise you. Okay. God gave me a vision in 2000, 2017, 2018.
Mhm.
He said it would start with a small theater. Um, then it would move to the House of Blues or a like venue that would be 3 to 5,000. Then it
Mhm.
would move to Mandalay Bay Event Center or MGM Grand, which would be 10 to 13,000.
Mhm.
Madison Square Garden, which would be 17 to 19,000, and
Yeah.
culminate in the Soldier Field or a like venue, which would be 70 to 100,000 that I would speak to.
Mhm.
This was still when we owned our company and I hadn't gone into keynote speaking full time.
Mhm.
I went to my wife when I got that vision. I was like, baby, God just said 100,000 I'm going to speak to. And she was like, dummy, you didn't hear the whole thing. Say it back to me. And I said it back to her and she was like, say it back again, say it back. And I was like, yeah, but didn't you hear the 100,000 at the end? And she was like, yeah, but it's going to start with an audience of one.
Mhm.
If you can become a 1-figure entrepreneur and you continue to pile those little tiny inch stones, you then can add any comma you want.
Mhm. That's
Hey, I want to be the expert in
uh-huh.
I start 1-figure businesses. You know what I'm saying? Like I can
Uh-huh.
help you to start a 1-figure business, right? Like I'm your 1-figure guy. That's what I'm talking about. That's how I want to roll, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So you're talking about talking in front of, 100,000 people at massive stadiums and all this cool stuff, but there's also a really cool thing talking about like House of Blues and that kind of vibe going on that you have. We kind of alluded to it a little bit earlier, but I want you to tell people about the Vibe Room because the last time I was in the Vibe Room, that was it's really hard to explain.
Mhm.
Because not only was the vibe itself just really cool, the venue you have, Edison House in Salt Lake City, is one of the most amazing venues in the world. It completely plays the part to a T. Just and the people that you bring on are absolutely amazing. It definitely feels completely different than a lot of the other. I've been to a lot of masterminds, and there's a few that really stand out, and Vibe Room was one of them. And so I want you to go into a little bit about how that started and what it is, and yeah, I'll give you just talk a little bit about that and kind of what it is.
Well, let me ask you this.
Yeah.
What were the components of you feeling that way?
So part of it was the venue. You
Uh-huh.
picked an amazing venue. So
Mm.
it automatically, a space, I think, can change the entire vibe. Most of the time, we're used to like, an airport hotel conference room for sure. Not a good vibe. Not a good
Yeah,
vibe at all.
yeah.
Kind of a weird
Yeah,
vibe. Just going to throw
yeah.
it out there.
Mhm.
And there's others that are these big, flashy event centers. Good, they have their place, but there was something about the venue that was intimate. So I felt, there were a number of people there. It wasn't a small event at all,
Yeah,
but it seemed intimate. It seemed like I was going and watching some really, really awesome people with my friends,
yeah.
which just seems so Kelly. So that was the biggest part.
Okay.
And the names that you brought into, like Larry Namer, just some folks with really interesting stories. And I'm a
Yeah.
story guy. It's what I do for a living. So I love to hear people's stories and what they do. And how Larry was going through how he started Talk Soup, and just it was like the last possible story you could think of. It's like it was really unglamorous, but it turned into this huge thing.
Mm-hmm. And
Yeah.
when he talked about being partners with Putin, like, I mean, I saw the audience. I was sitting there, and when he was like, "Yeah," and I met this guy, and he was in the military, and he helped me to, get a TV show in Russia, and then later on he got elected, and I was like, "What did he get elected to?" And he was like, "Well, he's Vladimir Putin." I was like, "What? Like, this is
That was a great
crazy,
moment.
right?" So
Yeah.
that's what I wanted to do with the Vibe Room is I wanted to be completely different. I was inspired by David Letterman's My Next Guest Needs No Introduction.
Uh-huh.
And I told my wife during the pandemic when we had nothing to do and we were watching Netflix, um, I said, I want to do that. And she's like, what? And I said, I want to do a show like that. And everybody told me you can't do it. What you got to do is you've got to have a back of the room sales and you got to have all this stuff. And I was like, but that's not what I want to do. And they said, but you got to have a product. And I said, what if the environment was the product?
Mhm. Yeah.
What if it was a safe space for people to come in that everyone's qualified in the room where no one has to beat their chest and talk about all the things that they did. They get to truly connect and walk away. And that was it. And then I wanted to add the musical element. And it was like, I mean, this sounds bad. I love the people that I interview. So I'm
Uh,
pissing my pants while this is happening. I'm peeing my pants. I'm peeing my pants because of the musical artist. I've got a musical artist named Miguel Mendoza that's coming in July 23rd. This
yeah.
dude is gangster, and he's
Mm.
inspired by Ed Sheeran. Ed Sheeran
Uh,
makes me want to pee my pants.
mhm.
I've got a guy named Roy Tuscany who is the founder of the High Fives Foundation.
Uh,
Um, he's one of the top nonprofits in the world,
uh,
and he had a spinal cord injury, and now he does adapt and destroy all the barriers around you, and he helps people to be able to do it. And
oh
he's such
man.
a phenomenal human being, and we get to sit down. And here's the thing, Tiffany Charles, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah. She's awesome.
Okay, so
Yeah.
watch this. This is how God works.
Mhm.
Tiffany is starting a nonprofit.
Mm.
Okay,
Mhm.
Roy Tuscany operates and founded one of the top nonprofits in the world, and guess what? Tiffany gets to spend time with Roy.
Yeah.
The last time I had the CEO of Michael Mina Corporation, which is a guy named Patrick Hummel. Well,
Uh,
it just so happened that there was a local chef that's building his business and wanting to expand his restaurants. And he gets to sit in the same room and hear Patrick, my friend, who
yeah.
makes me pee my pants because he's amazing. And then we're able to connect all these dots, right?
Yeah.
And it is, I mean, I tell you, it's unbelievable. This is a crazy thing too, Andrew, is we only have, I believe we only have maybe five, maybe 10 tickets. And it's sold out before I didn't even release the tickets. It's sold out.
Mhm. Yeah.
It unbelievable. So
Yeah. It, because it is such an amazing experience. And I know you've done such an amazing job of making the vibe so different and just bringing in amazing people. Again, no pretense. We're just going to sit around. I'm sitting around with a bunch of my best friends. We're going to go chat. We're going to hear about some cool things, and it's just such
How
an amazing
crazy was it
experience.
too, Andrew, that most of the people in the room, and if
Yeah.
you come
Yeah.
and you're listening and you come, make friends with everyone before anyone goes on stage, because you
Mhm.
don't know.
Yeah.
Everyone was sitting next to Larry the whole night.
Yeah.
Larry Namer, the founder of the E Entertainment Network, and
Yep.
very few people were talking to him. And he was the
Uh-huh.
most available guy, like, to talk. And then he
Yeah.
went on stage and everyone was like, "Oh my gosh, let me get your
Oh, there
autograph.
you
Let me
are.
take a picture." And I'm like, you've been sitting with him for 4 hours, like 3, 4 hours, And
Yeah.
so take advantage, and not only at the Vibe Room, but do this at the airport.
Mhm.
Imagine, right?
Yeah.
Imagine this. If you fly ever, you're probably coming in contact with anywhere from 250,000 to 1 million people in that day.
Mhm.
Your moment is waiting on you, but it
Mhm.
takes you, like JP said, to be present and be grateful in that moment for you to have an actual conversation. I mean, Andrew, you changed my life, brother. Like meeting you in Park City, not in Park City,
Yeah.
in Sundance,
Yeah. Yeah.
when taking the time and getting to know you.
Mhm.
Now there was people and there were speakers and they're doing all this stuff.
Mhm.
And you're the guy that always wants to make everyone else look good, but you're the dude that powers all those people.
Yeah.
And when we got a chance to talk in the bar, and when we got a chance to talk a little sidebar conversations, had I not been taken the time just to make a friend in Andrew, not knowing what you did, not knowing where you've been, any of those things, I
Mhm.
wouldn't have access that I do now, that you've given me access to a whole world that I wouldn't have access to. But
Yeah.
it was because of a moment that we had that literally turned into another moment, which was at the hideout, that turned
Mhm.
into another moment that was at the Vibe Room, that turns
Yeah.
into another moment that's here. And if we can focus in on those little tiny moments, man, like, you don't know the impact that the person sitting next to you can have on you.
Yeah. I have a saying that life is a team sport, and the people that we meet, the people that we touch, no matter how small that impact is, it's still an impact. And by doing that, it's like a ripple in a pond, where you throw a rock in a pond, it sort of ripples and keeps going, and just turns into this big thing that spreads really far. And I think it's important that we do that, and it's that connection. And I know that's something you're awesome at, man. Yeah, you're gonna be my friend for life. You don't have a choice. So it's gonna work.
I'm in, man.
Oh. Well, as we could wrap up here, I do have one question that I ask every
Yeah.
single one of my guests, and that is, what is a book or a podcast that has had a significant impact on your life? Like one that you could recommend?
Well, two books. One is The Psychology of Money. I believe every single person, every kid before they graduate from high school should have to read this book. If you're a parent, you should pay your children to read that book, The Psychology of Money. It will it will disrupt you in ways that will make you feel so uncomfortable, because no
Mhm.
matter what, like, he breaks the norms, and it's unbelievable. That's unbelievable. And then with the second one that I would say, would be, actually, it's a book inside of a book, but I would say, if you simply read the corresponding proverb for the corresponding day,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
corresponding proverb, and I'll say it again, the corresponding proverb for the corresponding day, this will be absolutely life-changing, because that's the only book that once you read it, it'll start to read you. And once it starts to read you, watch out.
Mhm. Yeah, you got me started on that, and it is true, and it really does. Like, so in the first of the month, proverb one, proverb two, you keep going beyond that, and you really get a lot of nuggets, and they keep coming. Like you're saying, they keep going and they keep going, and you start getting a little bit more and a little bit more. Yeah,
Oh man. And today's Proverbs 6 was all about debt. That's the
yeah,
crazy thing. And it was 3,000-year-old wisdom, right? Like,
yeah.
and it was just like, it talked about debt. It talked about the challenges of it, how to stay out of it, how to prepare yourself for it, and what'll happen when you get in it, and how to get it. It was unbelievable.
Yeah. Well, Kelly, again, I am so honored to have you on the show today. Thank you. Thank you so much for doing this, brother. I truly appreciate it. I truly appreciate you as a human being. You are one of my favorite humans. And I just really, thanks for dropping so much wisdom with us today. I appreciate it.
I love you, man. And if you're not subscribed to this podcast, subscribe to it right now. The greatest
Please
thing
do.
that you could do for Andrew, the greatest thing that you could do, which he won't tell you because he's humble, the greatest compliment that you could ever give is to, number one, listen to it. Number two, comment on it. Number three, rate it. Make sure that you rate it. It means a lot to him. And then the fourth one is the most important. Share it with every single person that you possibly can get in touch with that would utilize this information. And when you do that, then send him a message and let him know that you did it. But I tell you, that's probably the greatest compliment that you could give to him.
Absolutely. And I would greatly appreciate it. Absolutely. So thank you, brother. I appreciate it. Thanks again for joining us on the Hustle and Grind podcast. If you'd like to learn more about Kelly, check out the link in the description.